Hey everyone, Nick here at Kraft Music with the Korg Volca Modular, which is a semi-modular analog synthesizer in the Korg Volca line that makes modular synthesis easier to understand and more accessible than ever before. Unlike traditional subtractive analog synthesizers, Volca Modular is a West Coast style analog synth, which allows you to explore creating sounds and making music in ways you might not have thought about before. And speaking of being modular, Volca Modular lives up to its name as the first Volca with patch points that allow you to combine its 8 separate modules in different ways, changing the signal path with each patch. Living up to its name, the Volca Modular allows you to patch between its 8 modules with 50 on-panel patch points and 20 included patch cables. Combine each of the modules on board to change modulation information, to create new timbres, or to create an entirely new signal path. And speaking of that signal path, it all starts with the source section on the front panel, which contains 2 triangle core VCOs, or voltage-controlled oscillators. One is hard-patched to modulate the other. What that basically means is that one oscillator is always going to be modifying the sound of the other oscillator, and you can vary the degree to which it's being modified with controls like mod and ratio. Ratio controls the frequency of that secondary oscillator, and mod controls the degree to which the frequency of the first oscillator is changed or modulated. In other words, FM, or frequency modulation, but it's different from FM in a digital synth context because these are analog oscillators. And that sounds like this. Then the product of those 2 oscillators runs into what's called a wavefolder. And a wavefolder is a uniquely West Coast style of generating harmonic content above the fundamental by folding the wave in on itself. Controlling the shape of your note over time are what's called functions, and there are 2 of them on Volca Modular. One is hard-patched to control the first low-pass gate, and we'll get to low-pass gates in a moment. And the other is a free-floating function generator where you can loop it or use it as a one-shot, and you can basically think of that as a modulation envelope like you might find on a normal synth, where if I, for example, loop it by connecting the end-of-cycle trigger to the beginning of cycle trigger input, I get a looping LFO. I can then take that modulation signal from that LFO that I've created and go into the wavefolder that we just talked about, for example. And speaking of low-pass gates, there's 2 of them on Volca Modular, and you can basically think of them as a combination between a low-pass filter and an amplifier. And they're another hallmark of West Coast synthesis, used for making everything from plucky sounds to metallic clangs. And after the low-pass gates filter and amplify your sound, the signal runs into what's called the space out, which is basically a stereo DSP-based reverb that's kind of metallic and takes after traditional West Coast synthesizers because it's modulatable and adds a really nice spatial representation to your sound. So that's just the signal path of Volca Modular. There's also a whole bunch of utilities. The first of those is the clock section, which has different divisions of clock and the ability to modulate, so you can get a kind of breathing or changing tempo over time, or create polyrhythms by taking different divisions of the clock. Next up is the woggle, which is the affectionate way that we refer to a track and hold and sample and hold module that you can either sample random voltages to introduce randomness into your sound, or take a voltage from elsewhere on the Volca Modular and sample that in. And for those of you who already have a modular setup, for example, Eurorack, there's CV in, which is an 1/8" jack that's stereo, so you can take 2 signals, for example, pitch and gate, or 2 different modulation signals, and send them in, and Volca Modular will translate that into the internal voltage. So you can take signals from your modulator and use them within Volca Modular's architecture. In addition to the classic 16-step Volca sequencer, which can be pattern chained on Volca Modular for patterns more than 16 steps long, there's micro-tunings and custom scales, and the ability to randomize or bounce your sequences from beginning to end to beginning again. And just like all Korg Volcas, Volca Modular is an incredibly easy way to pick up and begin learning and creating sounds with modular synthesis. So that's the Korg Volca Modular, the very first Volca to allow you to patch and change your signal path, and a way to make modular synthesis more understandable and accessible than ever before. If you're interested in the Korg Volca Modular or any of the Korg Volcas, contact Kraft Music by phone, email, or live chat. Thanks so much for watching.